Morning, everybody. How we doing today? Hope you all had a good Thanksgiving. For those of you who live not in America, it wasn't Thanksgiving, but I'm sure there's always still stuff to be thankful for. Starting with, first and foremost, the wonderful art form that is jazz. I'm certainly thankful for it. It gives me such a heartwarming viewpoint of how people handle struggle and tyranny, and I'll never tire of sharing that message. The dynamic of art helping a people overcome struggle is such a powerful metaphor, and I take every chance I get to share that. And it gives jazz its power, its meaning. And for all the people lost in the virtuosity landscape, thinking that jazz is about some guy wanting to show you his virtuistic prowess and his intellectual spectrum. I mean, it's just not lost in that. And the second you start to become lost in intellectualism and ego, it ceases to be jazz. It ceases to be inspired by improvisation and the fuel of spirit and soul. And it's a metaphor I've used many times, but the shaman who carved the mask in Africa, the witch doctor, he never carved that mask to be the greatest carver in history. That was never his intent. But by virtue of carving many masks to become a great protector, he became a great carver. And those masks took on symbolic and powerful meaning, protected their village from evil spirits at night. And the virtuosity was completely a byproduct of the necessity of protection. By virtue of carving many masks, the talent became prevalent. But it was certainly never the fuel that drove the engine. And the great jazz players never were setting out to be the greatest trumpet player, the greatest saxophone player of all time. It was a byproduct of necessity, of playing hours upon hours every day as a place to vent your fear, anger, angst, frustration, and a place to feel safe. A mask they could put on to hide from the tyranny that living in white America every day for a black man consumed them. It's a heavy load to live under tyranny, under the thumb of oppression, not knowing it's today the day I go to jail for the rest of my life for something I didn't do. It's today the day I get shot by the police or by an angry mob for looking at a white woman the wrong way. I might have been reading a sign, but the amount of injustice that was so prevalent, it meant that you could live a virtuous life and still pay a horrible consequence. And white privilege is not knowing what that feels like. White privilege is having no concept of that form of injustice. Watching your child get lynched for something they did not do and watching the crowd cheer. I mean, that's a rage, that's a fear, that's a tangible weight that most of us could never relate to. It's the type of fear, angst, anxiety that will make you pick up a saxophone and play it for 8 hours to the traffic flowing by on the river because it helped you breathe, it helped you get that stuff off your chest. And until you hear jazz through that lens, you're not hearing shit. It's not virtuosity for virtuosity's sake. It's not the ego of look how great I am. Look at how mathematically proficient I am at going through notes and scales. It has nothing to do with that. And the number of people I hear talking about jazz through that lens of virtuosity and intellectualism, the second the jazz became intellectual, it ceased to be the art form that we knew it as. It was a remix project. It was taking fun songs that people knew and making them danceable and swingable so that we could have fun and enjoy life and breathe deeply. And when the jazz player went to the club at night to bring that mask protection to his village, it relieved those people of their sorrow and their tyranny and their anxiety and allowed them to breathe and dance and have a good time. And And that still exists in black music today in America. I DJ in the black community in Minneapolis, and it's the music is a solace. It's a place of refuge. And it's not about congregating together and talking about reparations and talking about racism and talking about history. For the most part, they do not want to talk about that stuff. Especially not on Friday night, Saturday night at 8 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock. We want to dance and have a good time and not talk about politics and economics and oppression. And we want to escape that. Because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That can only come from a place of great need, of great anxiety, of great oppression. It's a people that are not free that can tell you what freedom means. It's a people lost in the wilderness that can dream of a promised land. So jazz is that. Jazz is a people following the burning bush through the wilderness going, we will find a promised land. We will find an escape from this weight. And that's something to be thankful for. And that message is something that's so tangibly powerful because it can even help us elevate ourselves up out of the dreary, exhausting life that the rat race compels us to. The political divide has us immersed in. Jazz is a reminder of what's good in this life. People can find art to elevate them up from their struggles and help them breathe and live. That's so exciting. And throughout history, the winners of the great wars have wrote the history books. The losers of those wars get to make great art. And they're cliches that I've said for years on this channel, but they're worth repeating at times for new subscribers and for just people who need to be reminded that jazz is not just about some guy showing you, look how talented I am. And a lot of what jazz becomes in the late 60s into the early 70s, it does become intellectual. It does become mathematics. And I mean, there's different scales and levels of it, but I mean, so much of the jazz I think people celebrate is far outreaching branches of a tree, and those branches are dying and doomed. Those were never branches that were really part of the living tissue of the tree. And I mean, I'm not going to mention labels and artists here, but there's a lot of jazz from the 70s that's just so sterile and so dehydrated. It's lost all of its soul and its spirit. It's being driven by intellectuals, and it just has none of the meaning that the great jazz of earlier eras was alive with. We're listening to right now a pretty rare little record on the Mercer label. This is a 10-inch from probably 52, maybe 53. Leonard Feather wrote the liner notes here. And this is, of course, from the era before they really had art on these albums. And Mercer, of course, was one of Ellington's kids. And this is Mercer number 1003, so I'm guessing it's his third, maybe the fourth. There was a number 1000, I'm not sure. There's a lot of titles on this sequence. This was once owned by Radio City Music, 127 West 50th. Little address there stamped on there. It's fabulous stuff here. And on one side we have Oscar Pettiford. And Oscar did work with Ellington for a while. People kind of forget that. And here you have Oscar playing cello with Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn on the piano and the Celeste. Lloyd Trotman on the bass and Joe Jones on the drums. So you have just a fantastic rhythm section with Oscar illuminating the sounds of the cello through jazz improvisation, which is a cool. And Pettiford, of course, was one of the guys who really brought the cello to jazz. And I have some stuff on Imperial where he's doing the same thing. Fantastic stuff, and like I said, pretty rare. And there's even a blues for Blanton there. And Jimmy Blanton, of course, was the great bass player of Ellington's bands in the late 30s that died from tuberculosis quite young. And Blanton was the first real revelation on the bass. He was the first guy that really brought virtuosity and that freedom as for a bass player to really roam and to play melodic intervals and harmonic intervals and to really be an individual and not just a plodding rhythm. I mean, his innovations, Blanton's, were so dramatic and so powerful. And Pettiford was really the descendant of that and the next great innovator on the bass. And Pettiford's reach really is the guy that spills into the Ray Browns and the Charlie Mingus's and the Paul Chambers and all the other great bass players of the jazz era of the 40s and 50s. It's Blanton, Pettiford, and then everybody else. I mean, Pettiford was a huge impact. And Pettiford's playing a lot of the early bebop stuff. I mean, Pettiford was a huge name that really has lost a lot of its ring today, sadly. And then side two, you have Serge Chaloff, the great Boston baritonist, playing with Terry Gibbs on the vibes, Red Rodney on the trumpet. Again, Rodney played with Parker, was a powerful red-headed trumpet player. Al Cohn on the tenor, spelled with an E for some reason. Earl Swope on the trombone, Barbara Carroll on the piano, who has some fun 10-inch jazz piano sessions at Atlantic, actually. Denzel Best on the drums and Pettiford on the bass. So again, a really rare piece that I stumbled on. And at first glance, you could easily think that's a 78 RPM possibly. But it definitely is obviously a 33 and a third 10-inch. But cool stuff. The next thing I want to talk to you about real quick today is missing sequence numbers. And as a guy who's a collector of labels, I've stumbled on numerous sequence numbers that were omitted. And at times, I've found that the omission was just that that record hadn't been put into the modern lexicon. That it hadn't been put on Discogs or on the Wikipedia into the file catalogs. And so I've actually stumbled on a few cases where the record was out there. It just wasn't in the modern databases yet. And here's a great example of that. The San Francisco Style, Lou Waters and Bob Helms. This is a collection of two different 10 inches that Riverside issued in 213, early in 56 probably. And when I first was collecting the Riverside discography, number 213 didn't exist on Discogs. I couldn't find it. And I did deeper research and found out, well, there was a 213. And this is probably going back 10, 15 years now. And eventually I found one on eBay because I searched that number on eBay and found a copy of the record. And it's since been added to the Discogs catalog, so it's now a referenceable title. But there's numerous examples of omission titles that were omitted. And sometimes I'm always hoping that I will go back 6 months later and find that, oh, somebody added that does exist. And of course, the most famous example is Blue Note 1553. And there's been hoaxes and April Fool's jokes saying that the long lost Blue Note 1553 is going to be released. I mean, I've seen one of the Paul Desmond, I've seen one of the Elvis Presley. Obviously, those were jokes meant to kind of pull the wool over people's eyes. I think the Elvis one was Elvis Sings Monk or something. It was pretty. It was well articulated with the art. They did a good job with it, but it was certainly not a genuine title. Anybody knows Elvis history would know that. But Blue Note 1553, from all reliable sources, never got released. And unlike some of the other numbers later in the Blue Note canon that were scheduled for release and then canceled and often got released in Japan later on, 1553, I don't think ever was scheduled to be anything that I've come across. And I did a little bit of quick research just yesterday to make sure that there was no new addition to that information. But from what I can still tell, that 1553 they must have just missed it. It doesn't seem like it was scheduled to be any one thing, and it just didn't get put out. It just seems like they somehow missed that number, which is weird for a label that was very good at what they did. I mean, they're very meticulous. And so the fact that it did get omitted And it obviously went to the grave with Alfred and Frank. We're not going to ever know, I don't think, at this point, barring some secret vault of files being unearthed, where we like, oh, that was supposed to be a Jimmy Smith, or that was supposed to be a, I mean, who knows, Art Blakey. But that's a famous example. But there's other famous examples here, and I'm actually going to reference this to you guys in hopes that someone will be like, oh, no, I actually have that number. That's this. And for the most part, from what I can tell, these numbers, I mean, here's a weird one. Argo, the great Argo label. There's a Cesar Giovannini record, which is like 619, 620. It's early in their 12-inch LP catalog. They did not have a 10-inch catalog. They started in 55. So this is not some 10-inch that was supposed to be reissued and didn't get reissued. And on Discogs, you can actually see the artwork on the cover. But in over 3 years of searching for it, and I have every other Argo release, everything that they ever put out, I have. And I've searched Chicago record stores, which is where obviously Argo Chess was from. I've had Chicago record stores look it up in their, like, Reckless Records keeps a file of every record they've ever had in store, all their locations. They've never seen this Argo number. On Discogs, I've seen a couple promo copies come up for sale that did not have the artwork on the cover, but were actually a colored vinyl, like a multicolored kind of weird vinyl, orange and blue and green and red. I'm like, it seems like a weird title to do a colored vinyl release of. And those have never had the album cover. They've always come like on a white plain sleeve. And Discogs does seem to list this album with its Riviera cover. And yet when you look at the Discogs information of who has it and who wants it, only a few people claim to have it. And the ones I've talked to seem to have that promo copy without the album cover. And so it's something, and Cesar Giovannini was an Italian immigrant, and a lot of his other work tends to lean towards some European tradition. And so maybe he just gets filed in weird places and kind of gets omitted from jazz history because he was not really known as a jazz guy primarily. He's had other releases on other labels. But all the same, it's an Argo title that I would love to fill in, as I have every other title that Argo did. The Trend label was a West Coast label, and they omit number 1009, 1011, and 1012. And there's only 15, 18, 10-inch titles, and they disappear. But if anybody has a Trend 10-inch, 10,000, 10.9, 10.11, 10.12, you let me know. I'd love to figure those out. Clef. Clef is a very voluminous label with the Norgran and Verve cross-referencing. And there was earlier stuff that came out on Stinson and on Ash label, and I've talked about this quite a lot over the years. And so maybe some of these numbers that were omitted were stuff that he was hoping to reclaim from Mercury or from Ash or from Stinson, and then I'm going to issue those numbers as those titles. But Clef number 101, 102, 103, those 10 inches don't exist that I've seen. 100 does. I mean, 100 is a Hank Jones, if I remember. And they pick up again at 104, 105, but 102, 103, 101, those 10 inches I can't seem to find. Then in the 500 sequence, which is some Parker stuff and some Machito stuff, again, there 500, 504, and 514 are missing. And some of the Wikipedia sources say these were never issued. But again, if anybody has Clef 10-inch number 500, 504, or 514, please let me know. Norgran and their 10-inch sequence, number 17 and number 31, seem to be omitted. Storyville number 321. But yeah, Storyville number 321 is again a number that seemed to be omitted for some reason. Discovery, another great West Coast label with some fantastic Art Pepper and some Roy Eldridge and stuff. Number 2006, 2007 were omitted, and number 3004 and number 3016, two different 10-inch series. All four of those numbers were omitted. And there was actually a couple Discovery titles that weren't on Discogs when I was first looking for them a couple years back that I did find eventually by searching. I would Google image that Discovery number, and I found, oh, there it exists. And then find it on eBay or somewhere else. And another question I have for people is, aside from eBay and Discogs, what are other great sources for finding records online? There's a few records I'm trying to find right now that I can't find on either. And I wonder if anybody else has any other great sites that do good in jazz. I mean, I'm not looking for a site with rock and roll and R&B and all that. Just, I mean, if a site has those things and has jazz, let me know. But it's got to be a site that has a decent jazz inventory. So, I mean, Capitol had a 10-inch sequence. They had 2 as well. But they had the Stan Kenton Presents stuff, which was a 6500 sequence. And there's only about 15 titles in that, and it's good modern jazz. But 6508 was omitted there for some reason. Was it scheduled to be something? Is it something that's out there now? I don't know. Just, if you have Capitol 6508 10-inch, let me know. Skylark had a couple 10 inches that were omitted. And Skylark was a label that eventually gets consumed by Tampa. And a lot of it gets reissued on Tampa. Bethlehem has one of the most interesting and intriguing omissions that well, 2 actually. There was a Bethlehem BCP1, which was the first 10 Bethlehem LPs, 12-inch LPs, were couplings of 10 inches. And number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all those I was able to find, although one of those was early, again, not on Discogs, that I was able to find it and finally add it to my collection. But number BCP1, and Wikipedia has what it's supposed to be, what's supposed to be coupled, but from what I've seen, it's never been sold on Discogs. It's never been, I've never seen one. I can't even Google image the cover of it. So BCP1, which you think would be being the first number would be out there, never seen it. And then BCP number 1020, also BCP 20, was a 12-inch LP that was a reissuing of the Milt Hinton 10-inch that was 1020. And Discogs seems to list the 10-inch version, yet every time I've ever inquired about it, it's actually the LP version. And even the listing for the 1020 10-inch lists 5 songs aside, which is LP length, not 10-inch length. And I have all the BCP albums, 6000 series albums. I have all the Bethlehem 10-inch albums, minus this 1020, which has the same cover from what I can tell as the LP did. But I'm thinking that maybe as they were going to release this 10-inch, they just said, screw it, let's make it a 12-inch right away, and never did put the 10-inch out. And like I said, Discogs does seem to list it, but it also listed as having 10 songs, 5 aside, which no 10-inch has that. So, I mean, it seems like it's misinformation, and I've never been able to find the 10-inch version of that Milt Hinton. So it's something that any of you ever seen, the 10-inch version of that, let me know. Jubilee, in their early sequence, has a Verda Odell, number 1006, Go to Sleep. And I don't know much about Verda Odell. I don't know how show-tuney or torchy or jazzy it is. Named Verda Odell, I mean, it could be almost anything. It's hard to really know. But it's never been for sale, never been available. I can't seem to track one down. I think I tried to Google image the cover and nothing came up. And it was a very convoluted time in jazz history, because obviously we went from 78 RPM through the late 40s. The 45 RPM shows up, and then the 10-inch shows up in 49.50. And then the major labels by 51, 52, 53 are starting to do the 12-inch LP. And most of the smaller jazz labels don't really get the opportunity to invest in that new form until 54, 55. But it means there's a lot of changeover in discography and stuff being printed in multiple formats, and trying to decipher all that's part of what I love doing, and trying to figure out where did this album come from. What was this new material? Was it sourced? I mean, a label like Savoy or Verve, those are great examples of when you buy a record. Was this recorded in 56? Was it recorded in 51, 49, at 78 RPM? Did it get a 10-inch release? Did it get I mean, there's stuff on Verve that came out as a 78 RPM clef, a 10-inch clef, a 12-inch clef, and the 10 and 12-inch clefs usually have the same covers, often DSMs. And then it gets a Verve repackaging, often with a new cover, but it's all the same music. And obviously the 12-inch LP would often add a song or two from the 10-inch version. But I mean, it's just a really convoluted time in jazz history. So these are a few examples of omitted titles, omitted numbers in jazz sequences that would be fun to fill in and track down. And I said over the years, I have found a few things that are like, oh, that does exist. There it is. And obviously, Discogs is only going to fill stuff in as it comes available for sale. I'm guessing the Cesar Giovannini record on Argo is out there somewhere. But like I said, I've never had a chance to buy one. I've had a chance to buy a couple of the promos and always been outbid on them. And a couple times, and they haven't gone for much, like $30. But I don't think I want to pay much more than $25-$30 for it at best, because it's probably not going to be a fantastic record. But interesting stuff. And so anybody, if any of you have seen any of those numbers, please in the comments let me know. Just great stuff, man. So I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. Please comment, let me know how you feel. Subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the channel in any way, please go to my Patreon, or you can send a YouTube thanks, or there's a link to my PayPal. All those things are always appreciated. Help me support this coffee shop and what I do here and my research. And a lot of my research is reliant on me buying jazz records, because that's how my knowledge grows and expands. That's how I can share it with you all. And so it's nice to be DJing enough to be able to buy a few records here and there. I'm still not buying like I did a few years back, but I have been buying a few pieces. And in my next episode, I'm going to share some of the new stuff I've been getting. So y'all have a great day. Y'all be safe. Stay warm out there. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody posthumously. Christmas season is upon us. Y'all be blessed. We appreciate you all. Love that jazz music and love it for the right reasons. Peace.